One of the important approaches to being able to understand or be able to put together principles into a unified hierarchy where they can interact and you can see how two principles here might infer or imply another one over here, or you can actually see if there's a couple here that work together but this one here doesn't, maybe there's something wrong there, and you can actually look and kind of error check, is creating models. Now, whether this is in a scientific sense, so in the past people used to create models about the way the cells work, or the way human beings and bodies work, anatomy, or the universe, etc. And these models might have some logic to them, and they might work in a certain sense, but in time they might become outdated, and you replace them with new models. So that's another thing to understand about the concept of models, in the sense we're going to talk about them here, is they're not some perfect representation of what they're making. That's the whole point. We're actually boiling down the essence of some of the basics, some of the core components and essences of what makes that overall thing, so we can look at them, we can play around with them, we can move little pieces, and we can see what the basic core components are that lead to the ultimate thing. But they aren't the thing itself. They refer to it. That's why they're a model. And just as we found in scientific terms, I mean, most famously with the modeling of a particle as a wave, or light as a particle or a wave, these different models can both apply, or you can use one or the other. It's not the case that is only one's correct. In different circumstances, depending on the experiment and how you want to think of the thing, use a different model. So in this sense, we're going to talk about a model that I came up with in order to think about teams and how they're created. Because I want to have a way to think about how you connect recruiting the players to a team, then looking at the team you have, deciding the style the team's going to play, and then after deciding the style the team's going to play, actually implementing the day-to-day, every day, each match, each round, each instance of what you're going to do in the game. Now, I'm going to focus this model in terms of how I explain it, primarily on CSGO and League of Legends, because they're my main games, but this applies to any team game that I'm aware of. In fact, that's where I got it from. I got it from sports, actually, from watching years and years of sports, and then the way I would think about those teams, because obviously they literally have general manager who recruits the players, then they have the coach who looks at the players and he figures out how they're going to play, and then they have specific players who implement the style. They have like the pieces to do the hierarchy there, but even professional sports teams often don't get this right. So that's one of the things over the years, from comparing it to esports teams I saw and then professional sports teams, I saw this gap and this lack of a model in many senses there. Like, I think a lot of the successful people in those games, in each of their roles within the system, have sort of by trial and error or intuitively figured out a system that works for them. But even they don't have a model in this way, in my opinion, because I've looked at a lot of those people, except for some of the all-time great people, even some of the very good people who do succeed at each of these levels, or maybe even win world championships. Some of them, in a way, were lucky in as much as they just play one style and they approach it one way and they get things one way. So if they can get all the players in to make it work that way and implement it a certain way, then yes, they can win. But their problem would come, they can't adapt in any sense. They can't go to a different team. I've seen many great sports coaches that were good on one team, go to another one, look crap. It's not that they're a crap coach. They had the wrong set of players. They're trying to make them play the wrong style. Or they didn't have the right set of personnel instead of or even worse, they go to a team where the personnel looks good, but then they use the wrong approach with that team. There's a lot of ways that this can break down. So basically, the whole point of this model was I wanted to see what makes groups of players succeed beyond just individual strengths. Also, conversely, is another reason I thought about it a lot, is why do teams fail despite having some great players or a really good coach or seems like a good fit of players? But the thing about this approach is it requires honesty. Not only does it require that you think in a way like, I'm going to model the game and I'm going to think about it, I'm going to try and fit these pieces together, but you have to be honest. And this is one area where I think like a lot of professional sportsmen, and especially a lot of people in esports, fail completely. And when I say honesty, what I mean is you have to be able to look at your team and figure out what are our strengths. This one. What are our weaknesses? There's one area where people are very reticent to admit. Can't really do this that well. At the moment, we don't have the right personnel to be able to do this over here. Okay, this guy can do what I want. He can do X, but can two other players? And is doing X requiring having 2 or 3 players on the same page to do that in that sense? If you can't, if you can actually acknowledge that, then you're going to be able to use this model and you're going to be able to find other ways to be successful. If you're one of those players and teams, and there are a lot of them out there in professional sports and in esports, who think, a good player can do everything in the game and all of the roles, and we have no actual weaknesses. We will just work on them and all will become strengths. If you think that way, you will get into the nightmare that the majority of teams in sports and esports are in, which is you just see what the meta is, you try to copy the meta, and if your personnel and your approach doesn't work, then you just become a second or third rate version of the meta, and therefore you are second or third rate in results, and you do not win, whereas the team who embodies the meta, or even better, sets their own meta by following this sort of a model and getting a system that fits them, they're the ones who succeed while you're just lagging behind trying to be a worse version of someone else. Or every now and then maybe you lock into it and actually the meta fits you and you can do that and it works, but as a result you don't learn the lesson, you can't adapt in future. So a couple of great sports examples without going super deep on them is, I always used to, as someone who's watched the Pittsburgh Penguins in the NHL a lot, this is a team that just won the Stanley Cup this year, and the last time they won the Stanley Cup was 2009. Now, in the gap between then, it's not that they haven't had teams that should have been capable of winning the Stanley Cup, but they've actually never made it to the final again. They made it to the conference finals once, and the thing with this team is, they have some fantastic players. Some players who, each season, are among the best in the NHL. And you look at the depth of the team. In that span, 2010 to 2015, so the span where they're not winning, they have arguably, at certain times, better teams than the ones that won the Stanley Cup. And you look at what happened in that time period and why they didn't win, and you look at this model that I'm approaching here, and you'll see why. Because what happened is, they had a coach whose whole system in the playoffs seemed to be to just play around his two-star players and to put like almost too much pressure on them, too much of the game on them, requiring them to score too much. And as a result, this is one of the issues they had. Then you look other years. I mean, a classic year for me is the year that they lost to, I think it was the year they lost to the Bruins when they had Jerome Ignalia, who is one of the all-time great players, and he came there for 1 year to try and win. So they had this super stacked team. And the thing about this team was they could outscore anyone. But as a result, they didn't have proper defense. And when they went against the Bruins had fantastic defense, shut down the scoring, and that was it. The Penguins were done. Because they were just trying to win. If you score 4 goals, I score 6, and that's how I'm going to win every game. And it worked against a lot of teams, and they had the talent to do it. But in the playoffs, that doesn't work as well. The meta in that sense in the playoffs is very rarely to just be able to blast and outscore the opponents completely. And famously, their goalie in the Penguins was someone who was always a little bit shaky in big pressure games like that. You couldn't always rely on him. He wasn't the best. So what happened that let them win this year? Well, they actually had a worse team than some of the last ones. I mean, think about it. They lost Jordan Stahl, who was fantastic. They don't have Jerome Ignalia. A bunch of the good players are gone. Yeah, they got other good players in Phil Kessel, etc. What allowed them to win this year is they had fantastic defense this year. They had a better goalie this year. They had a coach who had a different mindset to the game. And so with a worse team, but a better approach to this model, they won the championship, just as they had done like 6 years earlier or whatever it was, 7 years. So, another quick example, I'll make this one a lot quicker, is in the NBA, the Oklahoma Thunder, again, is another team that could have won a championship, in theory, any year over the last, let's say, I think over the last 5 or 6, I think each year they had chances to win. Okay, a couple of years they had injuries to either Westbrook or Durant. But other than that, they had 2 superstar players, very, very good players. They had a coach who was pretty decent. And then what they did was they started out with the right personnel, started out with the right approach. It was working pretty well. But then they needed to tweak it because when they traded James Harden, now they lost a bit of that crazy depth they had and some of the luxuries they had. So now what they had to do more is get more out of Westbrook and Durant. And one of the famous things they couldn't do is figure out the balance of getting Westbrook to be this fantastic distributor and aggressive player and not take over the game all the time. Because the problem is, he would take over the game and be inefficient. And he's the point guard and he's playing with an incredibly efficient scorer. And so you see classic examples of them getting eliminated from the playoffs. And in the elimination game that they lose, Westbrook has a terrible performance, Durant doesn't get quite enough shots, and they don't have enough production overall. And the team isn't quite deep enough in terms of the star power. In fact, that's another area where, as an individual player, Westbrook hasn't learned it. Like, here's someone who has an amazing ability to attack the rim, can definitely penetrate, kick the ball out, distribute, be fantastic, and yet takes way too many three-pointers, takes way too many long, bad two-pointers, where he's not that sick a shooter. So now that you thought about some of the sports examples, I'm going to go through the model, and then we're going to apply it to some esports teams. You're going to see how I think this model works. And it's obviously, like I say, it's a model. It's not supposed to be some perfect system. It's a way to think about teams and then compare and contrast to others. So basically what you do is there's 3 stages to it. And it starts at level 1. You have to fix level 1 in place and understand level 1 to move to level 2, fix that in place, get it all sorted, then move to level 3. And level 3 essentially takes place within the game. Level 1 is a sort of like being the general manager and figuring stuff out there, getting the team together. Level 2 is like figuring out the approach this team's going to play, sort of like the general playbook of where we would be at and our style and who would be good against and how the matchup will work. And then the level 3 is going to be actually in the world, the tangible world, doing specific things that implement level 2. So level 1 is called identity. Level 2 is called strategy. Level 3 is called tactics. So level 1, identity. What this means is you play the role of general manager. You look at the players that you have right now, and you either say, with this group of players I have right now, do I need to recruit another type of player? Do I need to get rid of a players? One, like they might have 3 very good players, but as you see with the Cleveland Cavaliers right now in the basketball, Kevin Love's a well above average player, an all-star level player. But you put him with Kyrie Irving and LeBron James, he needs to play on certain spots of the floor that they play on. So his game is now neutered and is ineffective. You actually would be better off getting rid of him and getting a different player. In this scenario, you look at the identity. You either are going to recruit in this sense, or you're just going to get the players you have now and say you can't recruit, you can't add or subtract anything. You're just going to look at the personnel you have, the specific players and who they are, and you're going to look at what are their individual strengths and weaknesses. And once you've looked at their strengths and weaknesses, you're going to say, right, how as a team with all these strengths and weaknesses, what would the team strength be when you add them all together? You add and minus them all. And what would the team weaknesses be? And now that I've got this overall approach to the team, first of all, if I am the GM, I can now recruit and subtract depending on what I want to get to. But now I know what sort of a team we have. Now I go to level 2, strategy. Strategy is often confused with tactics because the terms, unfortunately, have been like interchanged way too much. So a strategy is supposed to be the general approach of how you do something, what the actual aspect of it. Tactics is the specific implementation. So level 2 of strategy is going to now be the style, the team style, the collective style that the whole unit of players is going to play with, that personal identity. So we saw the individual styles and strengths and weaknesses, but now when you add them all together, what is the overall team style going to be that's going to work the best to give us the best of the strengths of the players, ignore some of the weaknesses, shore them up, and as a result make the team as good as it can be. Because obviously not everyone's style can be implemented. Not everyone's weakness is going to affect the whole team depending on who you have if someone covers their weakness. So you can think of this as well as the team philosophy. What's the overall approach going to be to the game? What is the wheelhouse of where we're going to be playing from and how we're going to be playing and what we're going to be doing? Once you have this set, you can go to level 3, which is where people spend the majority of their time at League of Legends teams obsessed with pick ban and just looking at the way one player plays and then one player the game. And what's funny is they haven't set the identity aspect with getting the right team and understanding it. They haven't set the strategy aspect, sometimes don't have that right or are trying to copy the meta. And then they go to the specific picks and all that, and that's all they obsess on. They don't realize if they don't have the rest in place, it won't flow to this point. You have to have those 2 and then you go to tactics. Now, tactics is the specific moves you make to implement that strategy on the basis of who you have. So a specific round in Counter-Strike, a tactic, a read of an opponent, a rotation. In League of Legends, specific composition, specific picks for certain players. Yeah, this player might be fantastic on this champion, but does it fit our identity as a team and our overall strategy? If it's some fantastic split push champion, but we want to be a team fight team, probably not. Maybe we can only use that in certain circumstances, and knowing that that's sometimes going to be a weakness of ours as a team, even though it's a player's strength. This is the kind of sort of things you have to ask yourself. Likewise, obviously, you can pick 5 fantastic picks for the meta in League of Legends. Doesn't mean that you'll have a really good comp. It won't necessarily work. And can the comp itself work within the wheelhouse of your strategy, how you want to play the game? Doesn't matter if you have 5 amazing team fighting champs, if you have a team that's better with Siege in this particular sense in terms of the personnel and the matchup of who you're playing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to fit some classic teams who succeeded and failed into this model and show you how it works. So we'll go first of all with League of Legends. Now first of all, I'm going to go with an all-time classic lineup, Moscow 5/Gambit Gaming. We're going to put them in there, okay? So personnel. So remember, we're looking at the individual strengths and who they are as players. So we've got this super aggro top laner with a really weird champion pool. Now, what's great about that is Darian, is that I've actually described both his strengths and his weaknesses in that one sentence. Super aggro, great. He's going to be very aggressive, push all the time, force pressure, but he's also super aggressive, can be ganked a lot. You know what he's going to do. He's got this really weird champion pool. Oh, great. Well, we've got all these, like, lots of different options to what to do. Really weird champion pool. He's going to pick stuff that sometimes to other people wouldn't make sense. Now let's go to the jungler. We've got a jungler who wants to duel and wants to attack, gank rather than farm. Now that was very unique at the time he came along. A lot of people were just farming, playing strong, almost tanky champions for the team fights. This is someone who doesn't want to do that. Now what are his weaknesses? Well, in theory, he has to innovate new things. He has to forge a new style in that sense. Diamond Prox we're talking about here. Then we've got mid laner, Alex Ich. Strong laner, but more famously known as a strong carry team fight mid laner. Once you get him to team fights, he'll be a monster. He'll take over. He'll get the kills you need. Then we go to the AD carry. A pure laning AD carry who doesn't ever want a 2v2 fight. So what's great is he's going to farm up and he's going to always get to his 3 or 4 items or more, depending on when we do the team fights. And he's going to try and just safely farm up. Now, the downside is opponents are going to know he's not going to 2v2. They know he's not going to fight. They can pressure him a lot. But in general, he's not going to take those risks that lose the game at bot lane before you get to the team fights, which is where we're going to win, hopefully. But what are we going to pair him with? Well, we have this aggressive support, very aggressive in Edward. And he's someone where he wants action all the time. So, okay, how are we going to possibly fit all these pieces together to have an overall strategy? Now, by the way, Moscow 5 Gambit didn't do this. You can see in my interview, Diamond Prox there, they never really thought up any of these crazy things. They happened to lock into it, as a lot of teams and esports teams do. They didn't model it in this sense, but you can see, because we know they were successful, as you reverse engineer it, how these aspects fit together. So what is the strategy we're going to build around Moscow 5/Gambit? We're going to build an aggressive early game. And then we're going to have team fighting either in the mid game to end the game, or to win us back into the game. And the aggressive early game is going to be based around Darian, who's going aggro all the time anyway. To allow him to go aggro all the time, we've got Diamond Prox constantly babysitting his lane, guarding it, ganking for him to get him ahead. Alex Ich is a fantastic laner anyway, and he's going to push up waves, come and join Diamond Prox, and that's where they do the counter jungling and invading the jungle, and where they just all beat the shit out of the enemy, basically. That's the aggro part, though. Even though our approach is going to be the aggro early game, it isn't going to be the aggro early game for the bot lane, because Genji wants to play very safe, he wants to farm up. So here's what's great. Having Edward with him is ideal, because Edward plays those champions. Yes, he can play Sona and Lulu, but then he also plays, what? They're going to keep Genji safe, otherwise he plays Blitzcrank Thresh. Even the threat of him forcing a play, which Genji's going to go in on if it's like a certain kill, that keeps opponents back, that zones them off, that makes them not want to go all in on the 2v2. And even though opponents know the jungler's going top lane, they don't necessarily want to go bot lane. Can you really get something out of that always? Genji's going to play a little bit safer. Not always the case in that scenario. So even when it's early on in the game, we can get scenarios also where we can have fights that can take place because Darian pressures so much, the opponent goes to deal with him, and now we force a fight somewhere else and we win with the fighting. If not, even if we're behind with these fantastic aggressive players, think about the team fight. What made their team fight so unique in Moscow 5 and Gambit is that Genji wasn't this aggressive carry within the team fight. He stood reckless style on the outside of the fight doing damage. Admittedly, he was a lot more proactive at certain times that you've seen reckless earlier in his career. Genji was someone who just output damage all the time, but with no peel. Meanwhile, Alex Ich is the guy right in there fighting. Diamond Prox is in there. Darian's all over them with like a Shyvana or whatever the fuck else he was playing, Renekton. Edward, obviously, aggressively playing in there, healing people, depending on what champion he's playing. They had such a unique style, but you can see how it fit together. So, what are the specific tactics to make that style work? Well, we had Darian playing, whatever, Shyvana, Renekton, pushing in top all the time, just trying to push there, trying to beat the lane, trying to smash the enemy, trying to force him, trying to pressure him, trying to draw the jungler up. Diamond Prox is on Lee Sin, ganking all the time. Udyr, being in a team fight, stun everyone up. Then we got Edward. He either plays his Sona, his Lulu, keep Genji safe, or he plays the aggressive champions to zone them off, to make them threaten, to make them see the danger of it. And then we think they're like one of the best is when they won IM Katowice, they beat Blaze and Frost. Some of the picks they made there were just classic picks which fit their style and weren't some sort of meta composition. I mean, there was one game they played, I think this one was against Frost in the semi-finals, where they just picked Renekton for Darian, Xin for Diamond Prox, Kha'Zix for Alex Ich, Ezreal for Genji, and Sona for Go Superb Edward. And what's funny is that wasn't some like great combo that made a lot of logical sense before you go in it, but it was amazing because it fit all of their strengths and their style, how they want to play, and they smashed the fucking game. Now then, If we think about another team that's had a lot of success using this sort of model, I mean, an obvious one to me is current SK Telecom, who just won MSI and who won the LCK and who had to switch their approach. Because their old approach, remember, they had Marin, who played a very particular style and needed the help of Bengi going there, so it took away some of Bengi's jungle pressure from mid. And they played around top and mid very much, and then if it got to a team fight, Bang took over in that sense. Now, current SK Telecom has Duke as a top laner. Duke is one of the best 1v1 individual top laners in the entire world, in the history of League of Legends. But they don't play around his individual strengths. In fact, his individual strengths get subdued because they look at the personnel they have into a different team style strategy, and then it's only rarely they'll use tactics that let his individual strengths shine. Usually his is subdued, they play around the team strength and they shore up some of his weaknesses, he tries to help with them, and then instead they play around mid and AD carry. They play around Faker and Bang, and they play this team fight style, and they're not just playing this style where he can just split push all day and 1v1 all day and get the jungler all day. That's not happening in this particular sense. So they play a different style in that sense. We'll look at some quick failures. I mean, an obvious one to me would be Team Liquid of 2015. A lot of really good players should have had much better results than they did. Never could. They could have strong early games, but they couldn't transition that out of that. Why? They didn't have the right strategy. Then they didn't have the specific tactics to make that happen. I mean, an obvious one is, if you have Quaz, why just put him on tanks all day? Why not have him have carry games sometimes? Why put so much attention on getting the champions you want for Phoenix in the mid game? If you can't get to the team fights, when in theory Phoenix is going to have the effect, because even though you get these early advantages, you can't create the right skirmishes, the right fights, and get the ones that you need to win in the mid game to win the game. Team Liquid's an obvious example. Actually, Gambit 2015, the one where they had Forgiven's an obvious example to me, because Kabashad is very strong top laner. You got Forgiven, very strong AD carry, and it's true, AD carry wasn't carrying the game as much, it wasn't as impactful on the meta, but you're not playing around it at all at a point in time. You're giving 100% attention of the jungler to the top lane, probably too much actually, trying to force the issue. You should have shared it a little bit more, like 70% to the top lane, 30% to the bot lane. As a result, you need both the players, the top laner and the AD carry, to understand that. You need Kabashad to play a little bit less aggro every single matchup and try to smash every single game. You need Forgiven not to push up too much when his jungler can't be there. They didn't do any of these aspects. They had good players and they couldn't make it work with the strategy or the tactics. Then let's go to CSGO and put some examples in here. So I'll go with a classic example, because here's a great one of where I don't think they consciously did it, they intuitively did it, but Fnatic's successful 5-man lineup, which I think is the greatest of all time, the one with Pronax and Olafmeister, they had two different approaches which made them world champion level team. They had the 2014 team, which if you remember, was when Crims was really on his shit. And at the time, the CT side meta was incredible on maps like Inferno, Mirage, and these guys were monsters there. Even Cash was CT sided at the time. And their whole style was built around this incredible solo site play on Inferno, big site connector play on Mirage of Crims, and he was so good, and he could guarantee you it felt like 20, 25 kills a game, and he would always play these team snides correctly, and so it was all about this CT side strength, and as a result, you know what, at the time, Olafmeister wasn't that sick a player. It was Crims, and then it was JW being this wild card, and so they had such a solid team with Crims, and then Pronax and Flusher played a very team play oriented style, and Pronax just attempted, with this personnel, to make reads on CT side, so they could load up, and they were just always winning these CT sides in incredible fashion. Now on T side, their weakness was, they didn't have that great a team on T side. Olafmeister hadn't actually been implemented as well. JW was good, but he was one of the few aggressive players on T side. On T side, they would go very slow. They would try to do the same thing, mid-round reads. They weren't as effective though. They could get a few rounds, they could grind a few out, but it was the dominance on CT side that let them work. Coming in 2015, now Crims is still good, but he's not the god anymore. JW is dropping off a bit, his AWPing isn't as good, Olafmeister's strength rises, Flusher rises. So they switch things up. All of a sudden, the meta also isn't just super CT-sided. Now Cash can be T-sided. Now Dust 2's getting played a lot more. Now Inferno isn't this super CT-sided map that it was before. Now they don't play Mirage as much because teams like TSM come along. What's the Astralis now and be able to beat them on it, or Virtus Pro. So now they switch the team up a bit. Now they still have a good CT team, relying on the reads of Pronax. So they've changed the identity of the players, basically, in terms of who's strong and who's not, and where the weaknesses and strengths are. Now the strategy becomes this, like, solid T side built around Olafmeister. So we couldn't really get a lot of T rounds before. We didn't have a great style. We don't have great set playbook tactics. But let's use Olafmeister to create picks. He's the best player in the world, and he likes to play aggro in this certain way. Then Crims is the soldier. He follows you up. He goes in that sense. Flusher can be there for the late round clutches in this scenario. JW can't AWP as much, but he either AWPs in certain scenarios, or we put him sometimes with a shotgun or something crazy like that and have him follow up in this sense, or be a distraction over here. They adapted their style, and as a result, they were able to have two incredibly successful eras. I mean, a very quick one, obviously, to me would be Luminosity, because I see Luminosity as a team that was a failure in one sense early on and then became an absolute success, because they were a team where they didn't have the personnel to be able to fully execute Fallen's style, that strategy of like always win from the power play, always win from map control, leading into the tactic. They didn't have the people to execute it. Now, they were still able to be good doing that. That was their strengths in some ways. But once they upgraded the personnel and then tweaked some of these aspects, now you have coldzera, this monster in the mid game who can now help allow you to get the map control, then execute it into a tactic with this great consistent fragging. Now you changed Fallen to be an AWPer, so he can get early picks and information, and then he can use that to set up where to go and take over an area, or where to get a response kill when you're killed over here, and then how to win from the power play. And then you're in a situation with the specific tactics, where we've seen all the specific tactics they can come up with. They're a team that have a lot of advantages there. Now, an obvious failure to me in this area has to be Astralis, because I look at them and their identity. You can definitely get some World Championship teams out of this. They did for a while. But you look at who they have, like Device is incredibly skilled. You don't always want to put him in pressure situations where he has to carry the whole game though. He can AWP, but you don't want to make him AWP the whole time. KGB's a very skilled player, but you don't let him take over the game all the time, only on certain maps. So when they get the balance right, and they had like KGB on Dust 2 going crazy, and then they had Device in certain scenarios able to AWP on like CT side, not on other sides, and you had this aggressive T side where you would try to get... The key to me when TSM was on top, when Astralis was very good and one of the best teams that could beat Fnatic, was they had this really good T side where they get 7 or 8 rounds, and then they were mega on CT side. So that's going to win you games there. They can get 9 to 10 CT, and then they can get 7 or 8 T side. That's a great mix. What happened to them later? T side was still aggressive, still good, not quite as good though. Then you go look at the CT side, it was too much based around individual skill, because they had so much individual skill. They too much wanted to just hold on, wait for you to come and try and battle you. They didn't want to make strong reads and gamble a player over here or push up for information. They would play very defensively, play around the fact that if you come around this corner in a 1v1 aim duel, whoever's facing you is very skilled. And so against fantastic aggressive teams like Envious, they had their troubles. Against certain teams, they always seemed to have their difficulties, and that's why they couldn't go through, they couldn't win the championship. And that's what's so interesting to me. So yeah, there's my model for how I see them. Identity, strategy, tactics. This isn't like one model that fits everything. You can use other models to model other aspects of the game, but I think it's quite interesting how it fits both sports and esports. And I think it tells you why a lot of great teams with great players fail, and why some teams that have lesser players actually succeed, because they've got the right strategy and then they implement the right tactics. Because the most frustrating thing to me in esports is either to have really good players and not succeed, or even have, in theory, you do the intelligent homework and watch the demos, and you know what the opponent's weakness is, and you know what would work against them, but it's not something that would fit your strength and your style. It's not the right tactic for you, because the strategy doesn't work for you overall. You don't have the personnel to make it work. And I think if you look at this sort of a holistic model, and how I'm trying to fit 3 different planes, 3 different levels of the game together, and check that they all interact and match up, I think you'll see a lot more where the success comes from, and where the failures, or where the gap is with certain coaches, GMs, teams, players, in-game leaders even, if we're going from sports over to esports in that sense.